Mute. Kekala. Okay. Vanakkam, namaste, and good evening. Am I there? Okay. Vanakkam, namaste, and good evening. A very warm welcome to all of you to the first ever online festival of Hinduism. My name is Chitra, and I'm the moderator for today. The theme of the festival has been Living the Hindu Life. We've had speakers talking about how we can ground our daily living in Hinduism by following the tenets of dharma, karma, and living a God-centered life. Woven into these were enriching insights on a wide range of topics, such as Hindu iconography, deities, samskaras or rituals, pilgrimage. We were taken on a virtual tour, Ayurveda, and yoga, to mention a few. Today, we focus on the power of Hindu chants and worship. As you listen to the talk, should you have doubts or need clarifications, please feel free to send your questions through YouTube or Facebook comments. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the presenter for today, Mr. Krishna Sadashiv, known fondly as Sada at the Hindu Center. His 40-year professional career till 2018 spanned responsibilities in engineering, banking, mergers and acquisitions, and finally in climate change and sustainability. Sada is now a pro bono trustee, director of Forum for the Future Asia Pacific, an internationally sustainability nonprofit organization. He's also currently serving on several government committees by public appointment. At the Hindu Center, Sada actively contributes to the three wings of Jnana, Bhakti, and Seva. A Hindu Center trained volunteer, he has been doing Seva or service every weekend as a Mitra counselor at Changi prisons. He's also a trained Hinduism teacher and is trying to spend more time in spiritual studies and delivering talks on various Hinduism topics, besides contributing materials for Mitra program application and articles for Hindu publications. He's also a Bhakta who joins in the chanting sessions at Bhakti events at the center. So to share his knowledge and spiritual insights underlying chants, mantras, and shlokas, let me hand you over to Sada. Sada, please.
Good evening. Malay, Vanakkam, and Namaste. Thank you very much, Chitra, for that warm introduction. Am I audible clearly?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Let me start by sharing my screen. I'm going to share my presentation. Is my screen visible, Chitra?
It is, Sada, it is.
Thank you very much. Let me start. So, good evening, Vanakkam and Namaste, friends. I add my welcome to you all to the 6th day of this inaugural 10-day festival of Hinduism, probably the first of its kind. My thanks to all of you who have set aside time this evening to attend this talk on the power of Hindu chants and worship. My heartfelt thanks also are due to the Hindu Center Singapore for inviting me to share my learnings on this subject. I intend to cover the following in the hour or so allotted to me. The power of sound and the genesis of mantras, the purpose and types of mantras, harnessing the power of mantras through delivery, mantras in various forms, shlokas, etc. Then I'll move to the second part, which is around puja or ritual worship, mantras and puja, followed by the ritual worship itself, its origins, and then finally steps in a home puja. And with that, we will conclude the question and answers. I hope this should be a fulfilling program for all of you. Now, sound to humans and all living beings, sound known as dhvani in Sanskrit, oli in Tamil, is of paramount importance to our very existence. The sheer importance of sound is evident from the effort in describing the various types of sound and levels that we hear, whether as rodanam, crying sound, arugai, kuj, cooing, marmara, murmuring, gunguma, humming, shabda, the spoken sound, or spandana, the vibrations, swara, the tone sound, gargara, the crackling sound, nada, the soft sound, or saswana, the loud sound, or garjana, the roaring sound, or ghosha, the thunderous sound. And finally, in this family of sounds, there is also an important sound, the sound of chanting or japa. Thus, sound, much like vision and light, is at the heart of our very existence, and this was realized by our ancients as well as many others. Now, in his book, The Hidden Messages in Water by Dr. Emoto, Masaru Emoto, a Japanese scientist, he demonstrated it was not only humans and animals that related and reacted to sound. Through detailed experiments, he showed how water exposed to loving, benevolent, and compassionate human intention voiced through sound results in aesthetically pleasing physical molecular formations in the water, as we can see here. Whereas water exposed to fearful and discordant human intentions, again voiced out, resulted in disconnected, disfigured, and unpleasant physical molecular formations. He did this through magnetic resonance analysis technology and high-speed photography. So sounds and their characteristics and quality have a clear impact on the world around us. Now, the entire universe is the play of primal rhythmic energy, and in its essential form, matter is also vibrating energy that the great scientist Einstein revealed to us, right? Thus, the entire universe is comprised of vibrations. Vibrations produce sound, and the kind of energy generated and its effects depend on the nature of the vibrations. In our spiritual tradition, Hindu spiritual tradition, it is clearly said that consciousness can be aroused through specific sounds, which can lead us to the highest reality or supreme consciousness or the Supreme One himself. Now, the ancients were thus attuned to sound emanating from space, transcending Earth to include the entire cosmos, of which Earth and man are just a small part. Our ancients attach great importance to sound and to listening. Now, chanting, or the repetitive and sonorous rendition of certain sounds, whether in the form of meaningful words or merely as a sound, is a feature practiced in almost all faiths, including tribal societies. And you can see some of the tribal sort of dances that you would have heard on TV, etc. Now, in Hinduism, the importance given to sound is paramount, as I said, and especially certain forms of sound called mantras, which are said to be imbued with power, the power to calm and steady the mind, increase focus and concentration, and enable communion with the great unseen supreme power, also known universally as God. Mantras are also a part of ritual worship for the invocation of the Supreme and seeking the bestowing of favorable results, whether in a communal or an individual setting. Now, traditional chants in Hinduism are through mantras or mantrams, as I mentioned. The word is a Sanskrit word, but we do say it mantiram in Tamil also. And Sanskritam itself, which means refined language, is considered Deva Bhasha or divine language, or the language of divinity, and is the basis for almost all the mantras. The meaning as understood or conveyed in modern day English usage of this word is a faint shadow of what this word truly stands for. Now, etymologically, that is in studying its word structure, it is made up of two root words, manas, standing for thought or the mind, and tra, meaning saves or liberates, trayati. Okay, man plus mana plus tra becomes mantra. Okay. Now, it is said, mananat trayate iti mantraha. That is, it is that which liberates one is called a mantra, as in the form of a tool. So think of it as a tool. A mantra can be a single sound, one single word, or a series of words, depending on the category. It could even be a collection of sounds, words, whole hymns, chants, spells, or word formulas. And mantras are chanted in contemplation, that means in silent contemplation, or in ritual prayer, and it could be in public or in personal worship, as part of ritual worship to extol and appeal to God during a private personal relationship building time, also known as worship. And it could be, as I said, in a communal setting like a temple or at a home altar. And mantras come from ancient Hindu scriptures called the Vedas and Agamas. Many of you must have heard this. And more specifically, it sits in the Samhita portion of the Vedas and are spoken during Vedic or Shrauta rites. Vedic rites or Shrauta rites. Now, mantras are quite extraordinary. Okay? It is, as I said, is a language of contemplation and ritual also in Hinduism. An effective word of action, not expression of merely a thought. It is a word of action. They are seen to be as instruments or tools, or even you can say at times a machine for thinking, to generate a thought. And in a ritual setting, in ritual worship, you can generate a result from the accompanying ritual actions, such as, say, an Ayush Homam. We have probably, many of you have heard of this, an Ayush Homam, which is a fire ritual for ensuring longevity, whether for a baby or even for elderly adults. Okay? So they could be in a ritual setting or to even generate a thought. And in a ritual, prayer ritual situation, mantras serve two broad functions. They could first transform the ordinary objects which are used in the ritual prayer, like water, bell, lamp, sandal paste, kumkumam, flowers, food, etc., to sacred objects which are now worthy of offering to the Supreme, who is the highest power, and to achieve the goals of the ritual. Rituals have certain goals, specific goals. And also to worship the gods right from invocation or invitation to the prayer, and praise to offering, and finally to petitioning, for seeking of blessings and favors. Now, I quote Dr. Frawley, also known as Pandit Vamadeva Shastri, the reputed researcher into Hinduism and Vedic studies. He says, mantras are tools of power and tools for power. They are formidable, they are ancient, they work. And so I quoted him, basically. Now, there are several purposes for which mantras are chanted: to describe and praise the deity being worshipped, to express, to develop devotion, knowledge, even detachment. In the modern parlance, we talk about it as dispassionate objectivity to objects, people, and situations, so that we don't get emotionally attached to these things, right? That's dispassionate objectivity. And to attain through that inner peace and tranquility and contentment. Or to petition the higher power for more frequent happy experiences and reduction of bad experiences in our lives. And also sometimes to atone for past mistakes and crimes or sins we may have committed, which are actually troubling us. And we want to get some relief from those thoughts. So mantras have quite a few purposes. Now, there is the desire in every human being, an innate human urge to seek relief from the problems of daily existence. In other words, forever, our intrinsic ultimate desire as human beings is to search for happiness. Is that not true for each of us? And Hinduism fully acknowledges this goal and classifies them under 4 categories of goals of human existence, and they are called purusharthas. You see the first 3 of those, you will see the fourth 2. And the first of those is called artha, which signifies desires which are the essential needs of living. Basically you can classify them as things which are mine, right? And then the next level, which is kama, which is signifying desires beyond essentials. You can call them pleasures that pander to the I in me, my mansion, my limousine, my trophy spouse, my bright kids, and so on and so forth, right? And then comes the third, which is dharma, which is another goal of human existence, which is about living righteously or leading an ethical life. Don't we want an ethical life? Don't we want others to treat us ethically, fairly? We always say, be fair to me. Let's be fair to each other. That then talks about others, right? And it also talks about acquiring and enjoying artha and kama objects that earlier we talked about in a legitimate manner, which therefore also impacts others. If I do things legitimately, I'm not stealing from anyone to get my desires fulfilled, then I've attached dharma. So these are the first three goals. But finally, there is this: having attained sufficient maturity, we realize that none of the previous would still deliver the goal of ultimate true happiness, because you can keep on hankering for objects and relationships with people. So we have in Hinduism the fourth goal of moksha, or liberation, from this endless chase of objects and people, and instead focus on the supreme, on the superpower of God, and seek union with him, which is called moksha or liberation. For Hindus, this step also signifies the development of a deep intention to escape from endless cycles of birth, death, and rebirth, and dissolve through union with the universal consciousness or with God. Now, it is precisely in the achievement of these goals that, whether they are simple, ordinary goals, like I mentioned earlier, home, car, whatever we want, or lofty philosophical goals, such as we talked about universal consciousness, this is where the mantras and their chanting become the instruments for achieving these purposes for a Hindu. Now, in Hinduism, as I said, the most valued goal is liberation. And there are 3 paths or routes or approaches to seek such liberation. The first being the karma marga. Marga, by the way, means an approach or a route or a path. It's like taking a road, right? So the path of karma marga involves steadfast dedication to one's appointed duty, whatever be one's vocation or social status, with no single status being superior or inferior. Whether one is a teacher, a priest, a warrior, a worker, a laborer, a trader, a garbage collector, a software engineer, all are equal in karma marga so long as we are steadfastly doing our duty. It is a route towards achieving that liberation. The other path is called jnana marga, which is through seeking pure knowledge about one's own true self and the 3-way relationship between God, the universe, and myself. This is termed jnana marga, or the path of philosophical inquiry or knowledge. And then we have a third approach, which is called bhakti marga. This is the path based purely on devotion to the Lord or to the Supreme One. Okay? And this is known as bhakti marga. And in the practice of all 3 margas, mantras play an inescapable role. As we know by now, mantras are instruments, right? So great importance in Hinduism is accorded to chanting, and hence it's also treated as an essential supporting marga, termed mantra marga, or the path through chanting mantras. All 3 main paths, by the way, are not mutually exclusive. One may chant the Lord's name even as one performs one's duties or is singing in praise of the Lord. Hence, traditionally, it was not uncommon for our fathers and mothers to chant or sing or mutter mantras even as they went about doing their work, whether it would be cooking or cleaning. I remember my mother singing, saying some mantras as she did her cooking and, cleaning of the day, or my father, when he was writing, he would chant some mantras. So they're not mutually exclusive. It can carry on because the mantras form the route or the path to achieve all three ways of reaching the greater goal. Now, the mantra concept is quite pervasive and important in most spiritual traditions. Mantra marga is not only one of the major approaches to worship, but it is also the underlying principle of almost all the schools or traditions of Hinduism, such as Smarta, Shrauta, Puranic, Vedantic, Tantric, and in fact, even Buddhist, Jain, and Sikh traditions involve the use of mantra and use basically the mantra marga. So there is hardly any Indian tradition, spiritual tradition, that is not based on mantra. And mantras being intrinsically powerful, as I said earlier, they can also be explained as the sound form of a God form. The sound form of a God form. Okay. And I now take you through the next explanation around what forms of mantras are available. And the first of these is known as the bija mantra. Bija, by the way, in Sanskrit means seed. Seed. And they're usually monosyllabic sounds, essentially, and therefore they carry no meaning. They're not a word, they're just a sound, okay? The bija mantras. And then there are something called the mula mantras, which are for each deity, form, or devata. And the mantra is addressed to a deity to bring that devata's divine power and grace into our life. In another interpretation, the subject matter of the mantra is itself the devata. So it is the very mula mantra that is in itself the deity or devata being invoked. And any form or iconography we see is a representation of that mula mantra. There can be multiple mantras for a devata, and the mantra and the devata are therefore inescapable. They are one and the same. Okay. So when one chants repeatedly over thousands and thousands of times the bija and the mula mantras, one essentially is invoking and imbibing or absorbing the energy represented in those devatas, and these are powerful energies. And incidentally, the best effect before one adopts any bija mantra or mula mantra, it is best to consider getting that suitable mantra from a preceptor or a spiritually established and ordained guru. And some of the most powerful mula mantras are, I'm showing you a few of them. Om Namo Narayanaya, which is to Lord Vishnu, and Om Namah Shivaya. Okay. And there is also Om Shreem Lakshmi Namaha. And typically these would be chanted 108 times, sometimes even 1008 times at one go. And then one would repeat these over one's lifetime as he progresses through life and wants to connect with the divine or have that conversation and relationship with God. So these are mula mantras, and you can see that inside them they have Om and Shreem, and these are basically bija mantras, which we'll cover in a minute. Now, with repeated chanting of a personal mantra, the energy represented by it can be invoked and directed towards specific purposes. For this reason, the scriptures prescribe that the eligibility of a person too should be adjudged before inducting into such practice. A mantra should be learned, especially a bija mantra or a mula mantra should be learned from a preceptor or guru and practiced the way it is taught, for improper practice sometimes could be harmful to the individual or to his surroundings. And the rules of both the attitude and the application are therefore necessary for mantras to perform their work in the most optimum manner. It is not that if we say Om Namah Shivaya every day and we have not got it from a guru, it won't be effective, but its effectiveness will be reduced. Okay. Now, the foremost mantra among all bija mantras is Om. It is the most common and famously chanted bija mantra. It is also called the Pranava mantra or the primal mantra. Om is said at times to represent the sound of the universe and what science calls as the universal hum that has been picked up by radio telescopes. It is a fact that modern scientists with improved scientific instruments are eavesdropping and recording this universal hum emanating from deep space, and this hum washes over Earth too. Recently, in February 2020, NASA's InSight lander detected that Mars is humming under its frigid, dusty surface. The quiet, constant drone is periodically pulsing, But the source of this alien music remains quite unknown. So Earth too hums with microseismic vibrations. Now the jury is out whether this cosmic noise exactly sounds like Om. However, what is now indisputable fact is that the cosmos is full of noise, and there is a low hum that monitoring instruments are tracking. According to our ancients, Om is the very first sound vibration that emanated in the universe. In physics, we know that every object or collection of objects has a natural frequency of vibration, if you remember your physics from school. And when nearby objects tune into that same natural frequency of vibration, then they are in resonance. They are said to be in resonance. And when they are in resonance, energy is transferring between the two objects. So thereby, by chanting Om, we are in effect tuning into this universe and tapping that universal energy and enabling an elevation in our consciousness. Now, Om is also written as A-U-M because it's not exactly Om, it is Om. The Pranava mantra is full of healing power and is very, very frequently combined with other mantras at their start to improve their efficacy. Like we said, Om Namah Shivaya or Om Narayanaya Namaha, Om Namo Narayana. So Om has the powers of healing us internally too, steadying and clarifying our very agile minds, excuse me, and the myriad thoughts that constantly flit through our minds. So Om has this power to elevate us to a different state of consciousness, and when recited properly and under the guidance of a guru. Now, the family of Bija mantras or seed mantras, as I said, or primary mantras, are single syllable mantras, and they are very intense and are instruments to access higher levels of consciousness, being divinity in the form of a sound, as I mentioned earlier. They are the Devata themselves. Now, the Bija mantras are easiest to pronounce, by the way, being monosyllabic, naturally. Focusing on a Bija mantra, therefore, is one of the main methods of developing yogic concentration. Now, just as in yoga, seating or asana, as we call it, controls the body, and pranayama controls breathing. That means the control of breath, the life force that gives us the life force. Similarly, by chanting the mantra, we can control now our mind and stop it from wandering or losing its composure. Because once we are able to stop it from wandering, we develop clarity, and a clear mind can achieve the impossible. And as we continue chanting, the mantras generate refined vibration patterns in our mind, as we saw what Dr. Masaru did with the experiments with water. And it puts it into a steady and relaxed state for meditation on the Lord and our relationship with Him and the universe, and understanding that, and understanding why we are here and why we have been born on earth. Now, developing a steady and clear mind has the ability to achieve, as I said, even the seemingly impossible, right? It is the steady mind. When people were interviewed, in fact, we have great examples from Bob Beeman's miracle long jump in the Mexico City Olympics. You remember, he crossed 29 feet, if I remember right. People said it was impossible, but he did it. Or the more recent Eliud Kipchoge's running the full marathon under an incredible 2 hours. These are all experiments with a clear mind, no clutter. And this is where mantras help us in achieving this clarity and this steadiness of the mind. Now, other well-known Bija mantras relate to the 6+1 or 7 chakras or nodes, as they are known as, or energy centers that lie within each human body, and through which our life force or prana enlivens us. Otherwise, we are just gross matter. We are just made up of chemicals, right? It is a life force that enlivens us and makes us who we are. Now, our ancient sages arrived at an understanding of how this energy gaining process of the chakras are directly tied to key sounds represented by certain Bija mantras. And so you have these Bija mantras connected or associated with each of these chakras. Lang is for the Mooladhara chakra. Vam is for Swadhisthana, which is at the navel. Raum is for Manipura, which is the solar plexus, representing fire, right? In our stomach. Yang, which is in the chakra, which is Anahata or near the heart. Hum, which is Vishuddha, near the throat. And then Om, which is the Agya, near the third eye. Okay. And then Om again at the Sahasrara, which is at the very top of our head. So these are the Bija mantras associated with the chakras in our body. And therefore, each of us have these 7 chakras through which our life force and life energy flows. And we can actually enable these great energies to enliven us even further. Now, many of you would be familiar with the Navagrahas or the 9 celestial bodies. I'm sure many of those who go to the Shiva temples, etc., you would be circumambulating and going around these 9 celestial bodies, the Navagraha, which is there. And each of them, by the way, has their own Mula Mantra. Okay, I talked to you about the Mula Mantras there. For example, so these are the Mula Mantras. I will not go through all of them, but I'll just recite the one for Surya or Aditya, the very center of the 9 celestials, which is the sun. And that is Om Hram Hrim Hram Saha Suryaya Namaha, and so on and so forth. And maybe in the right side, you can see the number of times it is said in our scriptures to recite these for the best effect. So my Zoom screen is obstructing my thing. And yes, okay. Now you can see it says 7,000 times within 40 days for this Aditya Mula Mantra, and so on and so forth. So similarly, even the nakshatras, which are the 27 stars, have their own Mula Mantras. Now, if you are interested in gaining some initial knowledge about the impact of Navagrahas on your life, this was covered very eloquently by Mr. Dinesh Cheram in event 3 of this festival under the topic Hindu astrology and planetary effects. And I would urge you to go see the recording, which is there at the Hindu Center website in case you missed that talk. And as I mentioned, similar to the Navagrahas, the Nakshatras too have their Mula Mantras. And again, one would need to consult a competent astrologer to know which Mula Mantra to chant at what time and for what purposes, because each of us is impacted by the movement and the continuous movement of all of these celestial bodies. Now, after Om, the most powerful Bija Mantras are said to be the Shakti Bija Mantras that represent the Mother Goddess. They are commonly chanted during Devi Puja or Tantric ritual or worship. These mantras have great powers to transform and need to be approached with concentration and reverence, as they represent the very lifeblood of the goddess. And the main Shakti Bija Mantras are these: Om, Aim, Hrim, Shrim, Krim, Klim, Hum, Klim, Strim, Trim. So these are the principal Shakti Bija Mantras. And the extended E vowel is the main sound, is said to be the main sound of goddess Shakti or Durga. And many contain, if you notice, which represents fire, light, order, and dharma. Those that begin with the letters Ha, if you are interested to know, denotes prana, light, and the sun. And those with Sa or Sha indicates the moon, the mind, and water. Now, their impact ranges, as you can see, from harnessing pranic energy or life force to solar energy, to magnetic energy, and to various other powers if we want to get those imbibed or imbued into them. And therefore, these Shakti Bija Mantras are indeed considered extremely powerful, and they have to be inducted with the help of a guru. Now, there are many other Shakti Bija Mantras. I will not go through all of them. And an example of a weapon mantra, there are many mantras. So this one is an Astra weapon mantra, which is Hum Phat Swaha. So now Shakti Bija Mantras are used with good intent for benefits and nourishment and achievement. If used with bad intent, which also is possible, they can have destructive or crushing capacity. Now this is to be noted because quite often the Shakti Bija Mantras are used in occult practices. Now when the word occult is used, we invariably somehow start thinking of black magic and all the negative kind of things. Now, occult, the word itself does not mean anything negative or positive, because there can be good occult and good bad occult, which means it's basically reaching or transcending beyond the physical domain that we are familiar with on earth. Okay. Now, one example of an occult practice with a good intent could be to pray to Shakti for, let's say, discovering a long lost child, in a great mela or in a flood or whatever. I mean, during this great tsunami, there were so many children who got lost, right? Or for ridding someone of an evil influence. Someone in the family is coming under the evil influence of certain people. These are kind of occult purposes for which these mantras are used. Now I'm going to take you through some categorization which I attempted of various mantras. And we will start with, of course, I already mentioned the contemplatory mantras, which is Om, Om Namah Shivaya. And then there are mantras for invoking special powers that we just now touched on. And then there is this whole category of other, it's a broad categorization of other mantras. I'm not going to take you through all the ones on the right. Those are all the examples of the categories on the left. So I'll dull them out, and then let's take a look at what are the possible mantras and what purposes they serve. So these categories are, there are mantras for auspicious beginnings. There are invocatory mantras or Shanti mantras for causing a peaceful or a situation which is of good welfare around all of us. Mantras for Artha and Kama desires, as I shared in the beginning, and the Purusharthas, for security and for pleasures. Mantras to ward off bad events from happening to us. Arogya mantras, we have in India this Arogya Setu program, which is the health program, right? So for good health, and especially now in this current situation of, coronavirus, we want good health. So there are mantras for that, for strength, and to axe our own negative qualities, which are actually holding us back from achieving a lot of greater things that we are capable of. Mantras for carrying out daily activities, right from my very waking, when I think of the Supreme, all the way through the day, during eating, during resting, and finally to sleep. Okay? So that I do not even get bad dreams. I do not get disturbed, right? I don't have disturbances. Mantras which show respect to our people, like our parents, okay? And mantras which are there to seek pardon, as I said earlier, for maybe sins that I committed, for betrayals that I might have committed. Then mantras which are devoted to specific deities. There are plenty of these. And then there are mantras for overall well-being, for generic well-being, like Sudarshana mantras, Vishnu Sahasranamam, etc. And finally, there are end of prayer mantras. So there are many, many, many categories of mantras. In fact, there are even many more, but I put them under these broad categories. And now let us move to an understanding of how to improve the efficacy by the use of these mantras that I've been talking about for so long, through the proper delivery of the sound. Now, the efficacy of mantras is dependent on a few things. The first thing is the right pronunciation. Next, the right tone. Then the right meter, the distance between words, syllables. And then finally, how many times we repeat, the repetition of those again and again and again. And that is also called japa. Okay? In Tamil, we say jabikkaradu. In Hindi or in Sanskrit, say doing japa, right? Japa is also a Sanskrit term. Now, there is this statement says, if any of these are performed independently, that means we don't follow all four of these, then it doesn't get qualified to be called really a japa. Now, there is the saying, saswaro mantraha, which means the words along with the intonation forms a mantra, otherwise not. And the same word, when not accompanied by its intonation, is contemplation of the meaning alone and not really contemplation on the mantra or the devata and the powers that it represents. Now, a mantra is defined by many great researchers as being not translatable with any degree of accuracy, by the way. And even if translated, its apparent linguistic meaning is not as important as its holiness or its sacredness. And the same word, when not accompanied with intonation, is for contemplation alone, as I mentioned earlier. And in other words, we can say that the focus is more on effectiveness of the mantra, not on its meaning, if and when it does have a meaning. Sometimes, as we said, the bija mantras don't have a meaning, they're just sounds, right? So the effectiveness is on delivery. So let's, before we go to delivery, I also want to make this mention about how the great Hindu sages noticed that continuous chanting led to spiritual abilities such as clairvoyance. Clairvoyance is mystical seeing, ability to see things which are not normally visible. Clairaudience, mystical hearing, as well as other great powers coming through continuous chanting. They realized that our subtle body, that means the body which enlivens this gross body that we are made up of, as it grew, began to work with the laws of the universe in ways that seemed almost like science fiction today. And this is what the great Hindu sages and seers noticed. And so they naturally told us about this by carefully passing down orally and later, of course, written down also, what was found, which is today found in the Vedas, the Upanishads, and most recently the Yoga Sutras of sage Patanjali. Now, the repeated chanting of mantras is an instrument of power, and it's also known as mantra Shakti, which is a deep conviction often supported by evidence of efficacy among those who follow Hindu chanting and prayer practices. Now let's look at some of the rules of chanting. Each mantra has a rishi or a sage as its author, which means he did not create the sound, he heard the sound. It was a revelation, because many of these, the Vedas themselves are all revelations, as are the Agamas. So he heard the sound and then he passed it down, and they are in a meter or a chandas, as we call it, okay, and they have a presiding deity. And when we say devata, what is really meant is the divine quality and functions associated with that deity. For example, when let's say we chant Om Gam Ganapataye Namaha to Lord Ganesha, the focus of our thoughts is not so much on the meaning of the words Ganapataye Namaha, which says, I bow to you, Lord Ganesha. So we are not focusing on the meaning of that, but rather on the powers that very utterance of Lord Ganesha's name invokes. There is a certain power in those words, that of removing obstacles to whatever I'm setting out to do. That's what we chant when we say Om Gam Ganapataye Namaha repeatedly, right? So that is what is meant by understanding the power of the Devata. And the most commonly used meters are 7. I won't labor you through these, but it's good to know that there are 7 chandas or meters or spaces between syllables. And very importantly, there are 6 elements of chanting, which are the pronunciation of the alphabet called varna, the duration of utterance of each syllable, whether short, long, or treble, long, okay, longer than long, and then which is known as matra, or spacing the pronunciation of the letters in middle tone, which is called sama, that means the middle tone, how do I space it? And then the intonation of each syllable, known as swara, then the stress on each syllable, known as balam, and then the flow of words through proper conjunction of the 2 letters, because at the conjunction point, there can be a break, right? For example, in Kantashashti Kavacham, we say, Na Visaraswati, sorry, I'm just reading from the Na Bhikamalam Nalvai Kaka. So Na Bhikamalam is Nabhi plus Kamalam, right? But you have to say Na Bhikamalam, because that is the sandhi or the junction point of these 2 words. So that is Santana. So these are the 6 elemental rules of chanting. And I'll also take you through then what happens if we mispronounce. Okay? There is a interesting story around mispronunciation. And it is said that we must not go wrong either in the enunciation or intonation of a mantra. And if you do not only we will not gain the expected benefits from it, but the result might sometimes be contrary to what is intended. So the mantras must be chanted with utmost care. And there is a story told in the Taittiriya Samhita to underscore this. And that relates to this, these 2 words, which Twastha, who was the artisan of the gods, he wanted to take revenge on Lord Indra. And so he conducted a sacrifice or a homa or a yajna to beget a son, because he himself could not slay Lord Indra. Lord Indra is the king of gods. So he wanted to beget a son who would slay Indra, and he was a great bhakta. So when he chanted this mantra, Indra Shatru Vardhasva, he went wrong in its intonation. So what did he do wrong? Now he should have voiced Indra without raising or lowering the syllables in it, and he should have voiced the syllables through in Shatrur and Ruddha in Vardha. Okay? He should have raised the syllables for those two. Had he done so, the mantra would have meant, may Twastha's son grow to be the slayer of Indra. May Twastha's son grow to become the slayer or the killer of Indra. Instead, what Twastha did was, he raised the dra, he made it Indra Shatrur, and he intoned or brought down the Shatru and the Riddha in Vardhasva. Now, in the process, what happened was, the meaning of the mantra became, may Indra grow to be the killer of this son of mine. So the words of the mantra were not changed. But because of this erratic intonation, the result produced was the exact opposite of what was desired. And the father himself thus became the cause of his son's death at the hands of Indra. So the gist of the story is contained in this verse. I won't go through this verse, which basically cautions us against erroneous intonation. And what it says is that, what was the weapon with which Twastha's son was killed? What was the weapon? It's us. It says, not Indra's thunderbolt, but the father's wrongly chanted mantra. And as we are pressed for time, I want to this evening play a few mantras for us to understand what exactly all that I said means. Now, this is a Shanti mantra, and Shanti mantras are typically chanted at the start of a longer mantra or prayer to any deity. This is a fairly common one. Many of you would have heard this. And please note the intonation. I'm going to play it now. If it is a bit loud, you can then put down the pull down the volume in your
Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahavir Karavavahe Tejasvinabadhitamastu ma vidvishavahe Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
So I hope you noticed the intonation, the very specific balam, the stress in certain places, the swara, all the 6 elements that we mentioned there were there in this chanting. I'm going to take you through another, and you can see, by the way, the marks here. These are the marks. The underlying portions are where the tone has to be brought down, and the portions where there are marks, which are upward marks, are the ones where you have to raise the tone, right? And then sometimes you will have a double notation there, like vidvishavahaihi. So that part you will have to really up the tone. Let us take a look at another. Okay, these are some very powerful and common mantras. These are longish ones, so I won't play the whole thing. The first of these is the Ganapati Atharva Shirsha in prayer to Lord Ganapati. The second one is the Purusha Suktam in praise of Lord Vishnu or Narayana, and is considered as one of the Pancha Suktams of the Vedic tradition. It's a very important prayer and intonation. The Sri Rudram for Shiva, and then the Sri Suktam for Goddess Mahalakshmi. Let me play for you first the Ganapati Atharva Shirsha for about a minute's duration. These, by the way, are by 2 priests from Varanasi, who are obviously very well versed in the ability to chant.
Om Namaste Ganapataye Tvameva Pratyaksham Tattvamasi Tvameva Kevalam Kartasi Tvameva Kevalam Dhartasi Tvameva Kevalam Bhartasi.
stop that. Then
Om Namah
okay, the next one.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om Tachamyo Ravrunimahe Gatum Yajnaya Gatum Yajnapataye Daivi Swastirastunaha Swastirmanushebhyaha Urdhvam Jigatubhe.
So I hope with that you've got a fairly good examples of chanting. I'll move on.
Shri
Now, there are some things called shlokas, which many of you must have heard about. And shlokas are a format of structuring chanted prayer in a certain verse or poetic style, and so differ somewhat from the Vedic style of chanting Vedic mantras, which we just now heard. And the word shloka comes from the Sanskrit root word shru, which means hear. And it's usually in the form of a couplet, and they're a regular feature in Hindu prayers. And the origin of shlokas is credited to the very first poet ever, the Adi Kavi, as we call him, Maharishi Valmiki, who thought of writing in this form to describe events. Now, there are hundreds of thousands of shlokas that have been composed, and they are used in praise of various deities. Now, often in current usage, the term mantra, by the way, in a generic sense also includes shlokas. So sometimes now we sort of say mantra when we are actually reciting various shlokas, and shloka combinations of shlokas are also sometimes named in given various names. So I will not go through the technicalities this evening, but we will do a very quick compare and contrast between mantras and shlokas. And I talked to you about shloka. So mantras are a sound, as I said. They could be small text or long composition. Smallest mantras Om. There are longer mantras like a Gayatri mantra, which many of you must have heard and be familiar. There is the Mahamrityunjaya mantra for good health. And mantras are said to be, by the way, in Sanskrit and originating from scriptures. But mantras are there in other languages too. But in Sanskrit, they abound. And there is no compulsion to understand Sanskrit for getting the intended benefits. That's a key understanding we must have about mantras. There is no need, because sometimes they say, I don't understand this mantra, so what is the use? Mantras is the intonation and the sound, because this is all around sound that I took great pains to explain earlier. And then shlokas are mainly verses only with words having meanings. They're usually written together, and they're in the form of a composition. It's a musical composition, poetic composition, extolling a deity. They are sung. And they are in many, many languages, including Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Hindi, Madhubani. There are shlokas in every language. And shloka chanting requires an understanding of the meaning, because they are basically sentences that have been strung together in poetic form. Right? And this one is an example of a shloka. I've just recited for you. This is usually chanted as a starting shloka for anything which extols Lord Ganesha, seeking his grace, like I did this evening for this program. We want the internet to work well, the audio to work well, for you all to be comfortable, for the cyclone not to hit Chennai, etc., etc. So this is Shuklam Bharadaram Vishnum Shashivarnam Chaturvedam. Let me chant it too. Shuklam Bharadaram Vishnum Shashivarnam Chaturbhujam Prasannavadanam Dhyayet Sarva Vignopashante. Usually this is said by also sort of knocking on the sides of one's forehead. Okay? So that's an example of a shloka being there. Now let's move on to the topic of ritual worship or physical prayer, which is the second part of our presentation. The time is running on, so I'm going to move faster now. Now, mantras, whether in their pristine bija form or their stotra shloka form an intrinsic component of ritual worship. Okay? Now, ritual is nothing but sacred action, and mantra is nothing but sacred thought. So what is worship? So ritual worship is a combination of sacred action along with sacred thought happening at the same time, being done by the one who is the worshipper or one who is conducting the prayer. Right? It is a combination of these two that gives worship its potency or its powers. Now, in Hinduism, the process of worship broadly involves cleansing oneself ritually and energizing through the use of water and fire, drawing on the forces of air with incense, drawing on the forces of ether or space with chants with flowers, which consecrating the house or the place we stay in, chanting in the presence of deities or statues or pictures, because these are icons that where we want those powers to come and reside during the duration of the prayer, the sanctification of the seat of the meditation where we are seated, and finally, the invoking the energy of the Supreme for one's own self and others, because we are in the pursuit of happiness, and Hinduism recognizes that happiness or ananda or bliss is the ultimate goal of every human existence. Now, let's look at the various forms of conducting personal worship at one's own home. But before that, let me briefly touch upon the origins of worship in the Hindu scheme of life. And the term for the act of worshipping is called puja in Sanskrit, or pusai in Tamil. Now, it stems from this root word puj in Sanskrit, to worship. Now, interestingly, only during my recent readings, I gathered that the Tamil word pusai for worship is not the Tamilization of the Sanskrit word puja, but rather the combination of pu plus say, which is do with flowers, right? Pu is flowers, say. And do what? We basically are extolling, praising, revering, loving, devoting ourselves to God. That is what is pusai. So whether it is puja or pusai, it is one and really the same. Now, ritual worship in ancient times, Vedic worship consisted mainly of fire rituals, where offerings were made to Agni Bhagavan or the fire god, represented by Surya, usually in a public setting with chants recited from the Vedas. And over a period of time, they were supplemented by the agamas, which too, as we said earlier, are Hindu scriptures. And the practice of worshipping preferred or favorite deities, also known as Ishta Devatas, my favorite deity, for example. Okay? It gained popularity with the development of iconography and idol worship, which in turn led to the starting of the construction of devalayas or temples, as they are known as, places of worship. And this started, by the way, during the Gupta Empire between the 3rd and 5th century CE, also known as the Golden Age of India, and then spread rapidly all of the Indian subcontinent, all the way to the south, the east, and the west. Now, so now the formats of worship which are prescribed in the agamas are also called tantric worship. They allow the use of Vedic rituals like oblations to Agni Bhagavan, etc. And now the current forms of tantric worship includes Vedic rituals, temple worship, and home rituals, where we are basically talking about developing this relationship to the Supreme through daily ritual or physical acts which are denoting devotion, respect, etc. You would see a line there saying Bhakti movement. The Bhakti movement was the great movement in the 10th and 11th century CE, when great devotees to the Lord came about and they sung their hearts out, okay? And they are there in great number in the form of hymns, bhajans, all kinds of stotras, shlokas, etc. Let's move on to talking about the nature of puja itself. And the puja can be what is known as a combination of kaika, or that is through the body or the kaya. I use my body in the worship. And vachika, which is vacha or word, the sound. That means I'm doing this mantra chanting. And manasika, I'm also mentally visualizing my oneness or reaching the Supreme or tapping into those powers. Okay? So puja is a combination of physical, verbal, and mental process. And this question of why worship comes up, and it was actually very eloquently covered in Ms. Tavamalar's talk, which was event number 7. This, I think, was last Saturday evening. And so please watch the recording. It's available on YouTube and Facebook on the Hindu Center site. But suffice it to say, any worship is to God is to seek His grace, because the controllables in our life are very few, as by now we all would have realized. Okay, the imponderables and uncontrollables. The internet could have gone down today. This morning while shaving, I could have made a nick on my face and come to you with a band-aid somewhere on my chin. All sorts of possibilities. So the imponderables and uncontrollables far exceed the number of controllables and that we have within power. And that is one of the reasons we want the grace to fall on us. And please go listen to Mallar's talk on the why of worship. I will move on. Next, in this festival's opening tone-setting talk, which was again event number 2 by Mr. Ravindran on Hinduism, worldview and key tenets, he talked about how the life goal of a Hindu is, for the large part, God-centered life, even as one goes about one's appointed duties, right? And this life gets even more exalted when it transforms and expands to a God-seeking life. That means it starts with a God-centered life, it becomes a God-seeking life, which seeks ultimate union with God at the end of a mortal life. And this is enabled through contemplation or through puja too. Okay? And puja is one of those essential steps that enable such a lofty endeavor for a human being to be achieved because of all our limitations and the flaws and insecurities that we have. So we use puja as a tool to reach the great beyond. Okay? And you can please watch this recording, which is available again on YouTube here. Now, a God-centered and a God-seeking life can be achieved through a combination of both righteous living, that means living as per dharma, ethically, plus through showing devotion to God through puja. Personal worship in community settings is what we achieve by going to temples, right? And praying or taking part in community organized prayers. And here you can see basically our Prime Minister was at Srinivasa Perumal Temple here in Singapore, Mr. Lee Hsien Loong, offering his prayers during the annual reconsecration ceremony that took place in April 2018. Okay? And then we can see the Thaipusam Kavadi processions, which are community puja. Basically, it's a community celebration of extolling God. Or the very famous Durga Puja celebrations that take place, especially among the Bengali community here in Singapore, and of course in India in great numbers. So we can see this devotional vigor during all these Kavadi processions and the Durga Puja celebration. So now the rest of my talk, I'm going to devote mainly to the worship of puja in a home setting, okay, which is where I'm going to spend the next few minutes before I close up my talk. And I would like to cover the process because for many Hindus, especially in the modern generations, including myself till a few years ago, even though I come from a reasonably devout Hindu family, there was lots of gaps in my knowledge and understanding, or even fear and sometimes non-belief due to insufficient understanding. I mean, when do we fear something? When we don't know about it. The moment we know the light comes on in a room, you know that you can navigate around the chair and the table. You will not trip into it and break your leg, right? So it's about this fear of the unknown. So once we understand, then it's fine. So I'll take you through this understanding, and hopefully this evening I would have added something to at least some of those who may see value in this. Now, first things first. Much as we would treat members of our own household with love and respect by giving them a spot of their own within our house, shouldn't we accord the same love to the one who is benevolent to us, especially helping us with the imponderables, to whom we are constantly seeking his favors over controlling unfavorable imponderables and results in our lives? So reserving a small convenient spot is probably the least we should do for God, for him to be close to us and for us to be close to him. Now, whether we live in a large 3-room, I've literally taken out a plan of some of the houses here, especially this is for mainly a lot of people would see it in Singapore. I'm sure it is true for those from overseas also. Whether we live in a large 3 or 4 room or mansion, or whether we live in more modest surroundings, we can always set aside a small place for keeping some imagery that helps us mainly to focus on the Lord. This is more for us to focus. You can ask whether an imagery is needed. No, an imagery is not essential. However, an imagery always helps us. I mean, don't we want something as a piece of paper to do some work, right? We like to work it down, write it down. Otherwise, it remains in the mind and it becomes volatile. So the imagery is more to help us with that. And even in a single room tenement, we can find some space for a puja. If you don't believe it, I'm a standing example of experience one stage during my childhood when things didn't go too well. We lived in a one-room house, and yet there was always a small place reserved for the Lord. Okay. Now, puja rooms don't need to be elaborate. Look at this grand one. Wouldn't I love to have this kind of a puja room, right? But they don't need to be ornate or ostentatious. If one can afford it, well and good. Because after all, if you could afford it, it didn't come only out of our own efforts. It came out of so many other impacts, most likely the will of God and the blessing and grace of Him. So if you can afford it, do. But otherwise, you could have much more modest kind of simple arrangements like these. Some of these, you can see that there are some simple but very elegant and small arrangements. This one is sitting right next to a computer table. Because let's not forget what Bhagavan Krishna stated in Bhagavad Gita chapter 9 verse 26. He says this very explicitly during his song, when he is giving his suggestions, to Arjuna. It's not prescriptions, by the way. These are only suggestions. He finally tells Arjuna, take it or leave it. Okay? He's just a consultant, right? He says, he who offers with devotion a single leaf, a flower, a fruit, just plain water, they are all very dear, as dear to me as anyone who offers me great things. So long as it is offered with a pure and devoted mind, full of sincerity, that's all the Lord seeks of us. So puja and elaborate puja, it's showing our love. It is much like the birthday gift you may give to your grandson or grandchild. It could be a simple toy, or it could be a real moving car, which can actually self-navigate, etc. So there is this often misconception as to why does God need so many offerings? Why? What if I cannot afford, or what is not convenient? Then simply let us not. Okay? Because nowhere in the revelations, the Vedas or Puranas has Lord retracted from a devout and sincere bhakta or devotee because he did not get offered something. In fact, there are many, many instances in various stories when he may have asked something of a devotee, and it was always as a test of sincerity. And when the devotee went to great efforts, whether it was, suddenly the name slips me, Kanapa Nayana, who dug out his eye to place it on a Shivalinga on which an eye had fallen out. Okay, and then of course he regained it. So he is looking for sincerity, because that's all Kanapa Nayanar had. And so just as what you would give to your own dear siblings, the same thing needs to be given to the Lord. And so let us be very clear: the offering is purely voluntary and is out of our desire to show our love. Moving on. How do we carry out a home puja? We would need a few items. So I'm talking about a typical technical puja, but you will see at the end what I have to say about it also. And I'm going to play the steps through you. Okay. What are the things needed? Usually some pictures, doesn't have to be a whole dozen of pictures or idols. Just even one picture would do. This is more for us to be able to focus ourselves to the process that we are going to be conducting during the worship. And then vilak or a largish oil lamp, doesn't have to be an ornate or huge lamp. Okay. A prayer bell to sort of signal the arrival of auspiciousness and to seek dispatch of inauspiciousness during the prayer. We don't want inauspicious things to going on. We don't want the courier to come and ring the bell just when we sat down to prayer. We don't want the electricity to go off. So all of these things we try and hopefully seek help from. A dhupam for incense, a smaller light or a deepam, a camphor burner for camphor, and then a panchapatram or a small brass vessel. Sometimes it can just be a glass at home with a little spoon. Doesn't have to be this beautiful ornate brass vessel we are seeing here. I'm showing you some of the things which are shown on the internet and look beautiful. Then offerings, offerings much like we would offer whatever we would offer to a guest who is coming to our house, right? Fruits, flowers, okay? Then you need a little bit of oil, of course. You need sandal paste, you need some kumkumam and vibhuti, okay? And of course, you need some water for purification. So all of that is what you need in a simple thing. And if some of these are missing, he says, if nothing is possible, a small Ishtadevata's picture or idol alone will do. Sometimes just a picture would do. For instance, some of us from the Hindu Center go and do counseling in the prisons. And the prisoners are not allowed anything at all. All they have is a simple picture of the Lord they can keep in front. And they use that as a manasika puja, a pure mental prayer. So the Lord is not asking for, this is all for us to be able to give him what we think we do out of love and devotion. Now in a home puja, typically you'll have a bath, you wear clean clothes, you seek Ishvara's help for an undisturbed prayer first. Then you prepare all those puja items, as I showed you earlier. And you spend the next 20 or 25 minutes at most for a simple puja. What's important is devotion or shraddha, okay, in that. And importantly, not get distracted. And if possible, do at least daily twice or at least once. This is our connect with that great power from whom we are demanding or literally beseeching many, many favors. Right? And typically the layout could be, I mean, the Shastras talk about a Panchayatana Puja, the 5 locations with goddess Ambika or Durga, Ganesha, then Vishnu, then Aditya or Surya and Shiva in the center, because there's a Shiva Puja. It depends on whichever is the deity of the day you're doing a puja to, so you can place that deity in the middle. But as I said earlier, if you didn't have all of these, a single idol or picture would do. And having gotten all ourselves ready, what do we now do? We commence with some preparatory steps. Okay? And preparatory steps are lighting the main puja lamp, cleansing oneself, seeking support for the puja, steadying our mind through breath control, voicing the puja objectives like purification the seat. Then puja items. We must voice the puja objective. It is like goal setting. When we do that in our office, when we go for the day, we start by thinking, okay, what are the things I need to get done today, right? Or when we get up in the morning at home, we say, okay, these are the 5 items I have to get done. So too during a puja, you goal set and you announce it and voice it too in your prayer or your mantras, right? And then we also recognize that we are also part of the cosmos and we are part of God ourselves. So therefore there is divinity in each of us, and we state that too. And then starts the puja proper. So there were some preparatory steps and the puja proper. And you can do either a simple 5-step puja or a 16-step puja or a 64-step puja, which is really elaborate and grand with elephants and horses, etc. Obviously, we will not do that. But I'm going to take you through a 16-step puja because it is not really, it sounds 16, sounds quite a large number, but it's not too difficult once you start doing it. Okay? It starts with an invocation, and then we basically invite this honored guest, also known as God or Ishta Devata, your favorite deity, Ganesha, whoever it is, and offer him to take a seat, wash his feet, wash his hands, give him water for inner purification. We also consume water for inner purification and cleansing. Then give him a little sweet, like any guest you would. Give him some change of clothes. Give him a holy thread for auspiciousness, and then give him ornaments to make him look good. Okay, these are the offerings we do out of love. And then we apply sandal paste and vermilion, and then we strew a flower garland or we lay flowers at his feet. Okay, I will in a moment explain to you why some letters or words are in red. And then you do your chanting of select shlokas or stotrams or bhajans or various whatever prayers for the day. Okay. And then you offer incense, you light that small lamp, and then you offer him the food that you had prepared or that you had bought. Preferably, it is preferred food made at home in a very simple manner. It could just be rice and dal, for instance. Okay. It doesn't have to be some great payasam or some fantastic sweet or laddu. Or all that is not needed. If you can afford it, fine, but you will not need that every day. It could even be a few raisins. It could be a few cashew. Okay, so whatever you want, you can offer. You light the camphor after that, and then you provide the closing salutation. You offer flowers, and you then seek absolution. Okay, you seek forgiveness for any shortcomings that might have occurred, because these were shortcomings of omission and commission that we might have done. We might have had to step away during the puja because the courier came, as I mentioned to you, to collect a parcel. So it is entirely possible, right, in today's situation. Or there was an urgent call from the office, and try and avoid it, but sometimes it's impossible, right? Seek forgiveness for those. Then you release the deity which you had been invoked in that image, and you let the deity go back to what we say is the universal consciousness. And the red steps, now, unfortunately, I realized in my presentation the rightmost came up first. My animation I had forgotten to correct. That is, whatever food we have given, we then should partake of it, because this is blessed by the Lord. So it has been blessed, and then we also take a bit of it and give it to other members who are there in the household. Okay? So thus, we carry out 16-step puja. Now, if 16-step puja is impossible to do, you can carry out just the ones in red, as you see. Okay, those are the 5-step puja steps. So you can do the preparatory. Preparatory will not take too long. So let's say how much length of time does it take. These first step will not take, I can assure you, more than 10 minutes. In fact, it will take 5 minutes once you start learning the simple mantras. These are very simple mantras. They take about 5 to 7 minutes. Then the main shloka proper can be just 5 minutes. You could just say Om Namah Shivaya, 108 times. It should take you something like 6 minutes or so. And then, or you can even do a very long puja. And then another 5 to 10 minutes for the end. So the total, if you do a very short puja, it's barely 10 plus 5 plus another 10, 25 minutes. Okay, that's why I said the puja is 25 minutes, barring the small preparations. But once you get into this role, you can always do it. Now, it's important to know that all these steps that we are talking about, there is no compulsion at all for every Hindu to perform elaborate puja. Okay? The 5-step puja is fine, but here in Bhagavad Gita, again, shloka 29, the Lord makes it clear that all he seeks from his devotees is sheer devotion. Okay, and he says, I'm equally disposed to all living beings. I'm neither inimical nor partial to anyone. Okay? And he does not dislike anyone just because he did not do his prayers. Because during distress, we will go running to him, right? And he will accept us. But the devotees who worship me with love reside in me and I reside in them. So quite naturally, the greater the devotion, the greater the beneficial impact. So of course, similar to learning anything, some effort will be needed to learn the 16-step puja. Usually one short course of study should be enough to learn the ritual steps and the mantras. And it's not very complex. Rather than a self-study, join a short course if no knowledge at home. Oftentimes your mother or father might know, or your sister or siblings, and you can learn from them. When my wife and I started, both of us grew up in fairly devout households, but we learned at the Hindu Center here, to whom I am eternally grateful. And many centers offer courses. Annual courses are conducted at Hindu Center, Singapore. And there are many other organizations, and the Hindu Center offers a structured, easy to understand course. And there's a little bit of a plug for Hindu Center, naturally. And then with that, I pretty much have come to the end of my talk. Okay, thank you for your patience listening to this presentation. I hope it gave enough to think, and especially in the short time available for those who wanted to know about the power of Hindu chants and worship. I'm now happy to take some questions and also invite you to share your own experiences and thoughts on this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sada, for all the interesting and useful insights you shared with great clarity. I'm sure everyone here has benefited greatly. There are some very positive comments on chat. Now we move on to the next section, that is the Q&A. The audience, please keep your questions coming. Let me see if I have any questions on chat. I have one question from chat. It's not a question, it was an observation. I've converted it into a question. You explain mantra as sound, but knowing the meaning is also important, right? So what are your thoughts on this?
Now, for instance, the Bija mantras have no meaning, right? The other mantras like Om Namah Shivaya, yes, Nama has a meaning, Shivaya has a meaning. Shivaya is auspiciousness, and we are referring to Lord Shiva in this case. By the way, it can also be generic term for auspiciousness, and we say we bow to that auspiciousness, whatever be the auspiciousness. And the Om in front has no real meaning as such for the word. So it is a sound, right? So Om Shreem Lakshmi Namaha. Again, Om and Shreem are just sounds. They don't have a meaning. So this concept that we use the term generically, as I said somewhere during a presentation, mantras to mean even those that have a meaning. So yes, of course, if they have a meaning, it is good to know the meaning, but the sounds are good enough, is what our great seers say, especially for these Bija mantras. Okay? The intonation is important, the strength is important.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Sada, the general assumption is that all mantras are in Sanskrit, okay? Yeah, and you said, you mentioned enunciation, that it's important to enunciate the words very clearly, the sounds very clearly to have its impact. And the mantras on their own are very powerful. This is what you said as well. Now, we have a large Tamil-speaking community in Singapore who may not be exposed to Sanskrit language. So how do you explain the potency of mantras when they are chanted in other languages?
Good, nice point. Let me clarify here, as I said earlier. The mantras that were heard by the rishis and then given to us were sounds that were given to us, okay? They in turn, it is not that Sanskrit is a language developed first and then a sound that belonged to Sanskrit was then handed over. It was in fact the other way around. It was a sound that was heard, which in turn over a period of time was converted to a language. So a sound cannot belong to a certain language. So it would not be appropriate to say that this sound belongs to Sanskrit. On the contrary, sound can belong to any language. It belongs to Tamil as much as it belongs to Swahili, to English, to French, name the language. That sound belongs to all languages. So this is a popular misconception that mantras are in Sanskrit. I did use that word, I confess there, because that is the popularly way it is mentioned. So the words that developed were a combination of the sounds, okay? And that is why the rishis keep telling us, or our shastras tell us, the intonation is important, the meaning is not that important. When it comes to mantras, for shlokas, yes, the meaning is important. So for our Tamil population, and I am a Tamil myself, yes, those sounds belong to my language, which is Tamil too, to my mother tongue. Right?
Yeah. Okay. There's a good question here. We all try our best to get the pronunciation right. Now, is it possible that there may be certain flaws? Will not the Lord pardon us?
Indeed. At least that's why I quoted several times from various parts of the Bhagavad Gita, because Bhagavad Gita is so easy as compared to the Vedas, which are more cryptic, where the Lord repeatedly says that He is willing to accept it so long as it is done with devotion. So, in fact, there are mantras which basically towards the end of the prayer, where we say that please pardon me for having, in case, mispronounced, Mantrahinam kriyahinam bhaktihinam maheshwarah yat pujitam maya deva paripurnam tadastute. Mantrahinam, that means I made a mistake in the mantra. Okay? Kriyahinam, I made a mistake in my activity. I got deflected, my thought went somewhere else. I didn't do the right thing. Please pardon me. And the Lord is willing to, as I showed in some of those shlokas.
Okay.
So I don't think we need to get consternation. Oh, I chanted. Try. Always we want to achieve perfection, and there are lots of Westerners who are able to pronounce these mantras quite well. Why not us Indians ourselves, people of Indian tradition?
Okay. Now, one last question. It's about the youth. They're all busy with education, with studying, with their career, with their KPIs at work. Now, what suggestions would you give them to integrate chanting, a few simple prayers in their daily life?
Yes. I would strongly recommend that to learn, if possible, by heart, a mantra or a couple of mantras, at least for the favorite deity that particular youth has. Each of us have our own favorite deities. My favorite deity is Hanuman. Okay? Over a period of time, of course, I have other favorite deities too. But I used to, at one time, chant mainly Hanuman shlokas or mantras. Okay? So you can start in a simple manner. Rome was never built in a day, right? So you can do it slowly. And human potential to learn is immense. Just imagine, this COVID has made us learn so many things, right? Yes. Even those who are they would say, oh, I've never touched a laptop, and now they are Zoom maestros, right?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. We are running out of time, so we have to close the session soon. Thank you, Sada, for all the interesting and useful insights. I'm sure many have benefited from this whole session. I like the way you kept reminding and reinforcing about the importance of chants. On that note, thank you all for your participation as well. I have a few slides to share with you. Just give me a few seconds. As you all know, this festival of Hinduism is organized by the Hindu Center. The center's activities are based on the 3 pillars of Jnana, Bhakti, and Seva. And as you can see on the slide, each pillar supports a range of activities. In 2019, Hindu Center delivered over 25,000 beneficiary hours in prisons and old age homes. So we need your support. This will allow us to deliver even more in the coming years. So how can you support us? You can make your donation at www.hinducenter.org.sg or donations through the QR code that is shown here. One-time or regular donations are welcome, but please support generously. You can also volunteer your time and expertise through our various projects as well. Now, if you want to be informed of Hindu Center's activities, then sign up for the What's Up at Hindu Center broadcast group, and you will receive timely notices of different events taking place. Send a message to the number shown here, give us your name and your email ID. Be assured your confidentiality will be maintained and they will be used only for this purpose. So we've now come to the end of today's session. As you can see, the events coming up tomorrow are the significance and spirituality of temple architecture. This is at 4:30 p.m. The power of women in Mahabharata at 7 p.m. Very interesting. And we have 4 more days to go for the Singapore Festival of Hinduism. So check out the rest of the events at the festival website. Please support the events with your presence. Thank you all once again. Namaste and good night. Okay. Yeah. Cannot hear. Okay.
If there is a video problem, I can chant it itself.
ॐ सर्वेषां स्वस्तिर्भवतु सर्वेषां शान्तिर्भवतु सर्वेषां पूर्णं भवतु सर्वेषां मङ्गलं भवतु सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः